Welcome to No One Tells You This. I'm Laura Massetti. Nobody tells you that your career plan and your life are going to run on separate tracks. Nobody tells you that the decisions you make in the hardest chapter of your life are some of the most consequential ones that you will ever make for your career. My guest today did not step back when her life became the hardest it has ever been. She made a strategic decision inside of it. Erica Olenski is a healthcare strategist, board certified patient advocate, founder of August Artists, and a nationally recognized voice of human centered innovation and lived experiences. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you on here and get everything that we can know about patient experience, professionalism, getting adapted to the workplace, all those things. So, thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much for
joining
having
us.
me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Great. So, before we get into anything else, I give a very brief introduction, but I will leave the real introduction for you. And tell us a little bit about your journey, your background.
I am, like you said, a healthcare strategist by trade. That's my day job. I'm also the founder of August Artists, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on donating window crayons to children's hospitals and then art commemoration services. So the pictures that they draw on the windows in their hospital room can come home with them in some form or fashion. And then of course, patient advocacy is the extension of that as well. As a professional, I've had a lot of different roles and hats or head wraps and head scarves in my 20 years working in this industry. Started my career actually in radiology in a clinical capacity, which is what introduced me to healthcare. And I fell in love with the industry even early on. And so I knew I wanted to commit my career to this space. I felt like there was some really sacred work that was happening. I didn't feel pulled into the clinical side of care delivery. And so I generally have spent my career working on the business side, which looks like kind of mostly B2B environments, working with healthcare technology vendors, healthcare innovation startups, all sorts of people working behind the scenes more often than not than the frontline caregivers that most of us are familiar with in healthcare. I started my career there and I've spent 20 years in that space. But about a decade into my career, I had a profound experience. My second son, August, was born in the end of 2018. And at 5 months old in May of 2019, he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. And so I thought I knew healthcare. I thought I knew all of the things that were involved with the space. I thought I knew I thought I understood patient experience. I thought I understood all of those things. And I was really humbled by that experience as his caregiver because I realized how much, one, I didn't know about that journey. And then I didn't realize how hard it was in some ways. And I thought I had all the things set up to be able to be successful and help him navigate that, but it still proved to be so challenging. And so on the other side of that caregiving experience, now where I'm at in my career, I'm really trying to focus on how do I take that experience as his caregiver and all the lessons learned from that journey and help the industry see where are we letting patients and families down in the process? And are there areas that maybe are even like really low hanging fruit ROI opportunities that we can invest in and focus our time and energy into that can actually have an impact for patients and caregivers? If we do that right, funny enough, my hypothesis is that it actually helps improve care outcomes at the end of the day, even though we're maybe not exactly measuring that impact as well as we could be. But I think we're moving in that direction.
I love that. And every time that you mention your story with your son, it's have such a special place for you and what you've gone through. And I love that what you're doing is so central to your experience that you went through and looking to try to improve that. What's interesting is when I think earlier in my life, when I thought about healthcare and helping people, I think I've always thought about it in the frame of you need to be a doctor, you need to be a nurse. So tell me a little bit more on, your space and other spaces out there of other ways that you can be part of that network of
Well,
support in the healthcare
virtually any
space.
company, any role that exists in a company is available to you in the healthcare industry. So if you're interested in healthcare, there are lots of opportunities to take your career any direction you want. If you want to go into advertising and the creative space, there's lots of opportunities to do that. If you want to go into policy and government, there's of course lots of opportunities to do that. There's technology engineers, if you want to lean into something more technical, AI, workflow design, project management, all of those things are also so needed. This industry accounts for about one quarter to 1/5 of our GDP. And so that just tells you the scale and impact of this industry economically. It's incredibly verbose, and there are so many opportunities you can take your career within that one industry itself. And what I found, and there's a bit of a running joke within healthcare too, that most people that have kind of done some work in their industry in that space and have committed their career in some form or fashion to healthcare often might even try to leave and then ultimately come back because the work is so not just stimulating and intellectually stimulating, but it's incredibly rewarding because even if you are a few degrees removed from the actual care delivery itself, everything contributes at the end of the day to what that experience is like for the patients and caregivers. And so you might not be the clinician that's delivering the care or helping make care plan decisions, or the nurse that's bedside and managing IVs, or an ultrasound tech who's helping identify something diagnostic. It still all contributes to the bigger picture and that ultimate experience that's felt by the patient and caregiver at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think that's important to call out because it's not intuitive. And I think a lot of times when you enter your professional life, you in a lot of cases, the industry is secondary, right? So you'll go in saying that I want to do advertising, or you think about the industry after, but the industry is absolutely a choice that you have and that you can make. And I fell in love with healthcare too.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I started my journey IB and I was in the healthcare space. I fought so hard for that. And it does, it gives you that feeling of the direct and indirect way that you are making
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
better. So yeah, I love that. So when we had spoken the first time, firstly, for some background, and I think the power of really networking, me and Erica, we had met
It
random
was like different.
events. Yeah. And they keep saying the conferences are dead and stop spending your money on going to conferences, go to conferences. That's you meet people, but I was you had spoken there. You're an amazing speaker. And yeah, so it was great to see you in that capacity. But when I spoke with you, you were just absolutely captivating. And I don't know what that is about you, but I mentioned that the first time. Like I was just really drawn to you and your storytelling capabilities and whatnot. But I know this wasn't your path the whole time to be in, what you're doing now. So tell us a little bit more on like the impact that you're making now and the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
A little bit more on that.
The journey to connect those two things, I think, is probably pretty interesting. And so in the healthcare industry, I started out clinical, but that's not where I took my career. I wound up graduating with a degree in public relations, which probably has helped the storytelling piece a little bit of my journey, and have spent most of my career working in community building and corporate and strategic communications, some crisis communications. But a lot of that, the storytelling side of healthcare, and how do businesses maybe that aren't delivering clinical services communicate to the marketplace what it is they're doing and why it's important. And so I've spent most of my career there. And when August got sick initially, I was trying to reconcile these worlds because I was a mother who was trying to care for her child. And in my son's case, it was very high, what we call high acuity, which means it's a high risk, very intense. There's a lot of it's truly a life or death scenario in most days. So caring for him was very demanding. And early on, as I was trying to maintain my career while also caring for him, I was afraid that if I spent too much time caregiving, it would impact my ability to maintain my career. And that's a reasonable concern. I think a lot of caregivers face that inflection point in their own journey at some point or another. In our case, our journey wasn't short. So despite being high intensity and acute in life and death, it actually lasted 6.5 years, which is a really long time to exist in that mind space. And so about a year or two into that experience, I was working for a company, and we had an incident where my son wound up getting admitted to the hospital. I got really ill with COVID, actually, and our whole family wound up getting sick with COVID. And my son was in the hospital, and there was this moment where I was working in the hospital room, which at this point had been pretty normal for me to function day to day. I just continued working remotely from the hospital room rather than my house. And I was leading a meeting, and someone came in to do a chest x-ray on my son. And if you know anything about chest x-rays, radiation, of course, can be dangerous. And so when you're in the room as that x-ray is occurring, they will give you a lead vest to cover your body to protect yourself if you remain in the room itself, which was always an option, or I could leave the room. Well, I was leading this meeting. I couldn't quite exit. So I took the lead vest on in stride, put the neck on my neck, put the lead vest on, not missing a beat while leading this meeting. And I had a coworker ask me, like, what are you doing? Like, what is happening right now? And I was, oh, we're in the hospital. It's no big deal. Like, don't mind this. Just keep going. And it was really disturbing for the folks on the call. Whereas for me, I was in such a survival mode. I was like, I can't afford to not do this. I can't afford to not miss a beat. I need to make sure that this job continues to know how committed I am to it. And that moment was such an inflection point for me professionally, because it revealed that despite my best attempt, I also wasn't in isolation in my decision making. The impact of my decision to try to keep those worlds separate, one, was impossible, that I really couldn't, but also that my decision was going to impact others around me, and in some ways even maybe be traumatizing for some other people, depending on their own journey and their own experience. And so there was a bit of a fallout following that journey, or following that moment. And I wound up recalibrating, orienting my career, decided to actually become a contractor to give me a little bit more flexibility in terms of hospital admissions and being able to manage and balance those things. But in that moment, I also I had this epiphany that I was going to, from that point forward, always make sure that my career was not in opposition to my role as a caregiver. Because if I was going to truly be able to maintain my career through that journey, I had to have my caregiving experience be a tailwind to the work that I did professionally. And so I pivoted and changed my mindset in that moment. I said, from this point forward, everything I do as a caregiver is going to contribute value to what I do professionally. And I'm going to change and adjust what I do professionally to make sure that that experience in my personal world was only going to ever add value and not try to distract. That I wasn't going to keep those things separate. I was going to be incredibly more vulnerable and revealing of those worlds colliding. And it took a few months to shake out, because that's disorienting and it takes time to figure out your groove when you make a big shift like that. But ever since then, it's been incredible to see what's come from that, because what ultimately occurred is my career expanded, not just as a communications professional, but I became a formally board certified patient advocate, a certified patient experience professional. I was able to take these journeys and experiences and insights that I knew held market value and turn them into actual market value, instead of trying to have them continually compete with one another.
So much so many questions. Firstly, I talk about this in such a logical
Yeah.
way, right? I imagine that period of your life was nothing but that. How did you get to that place of kind of just being in the mindset of like, this is what I need to do to protect myself, do what I need to do as a mother, as a caregiver, as a
Yeah.
partner?
It was a lot.
It's a lot.
It was a
It's
lot.
a
And I
lot.
mean, this was in COVID. Our social circles and support circles were also pretty limited. I was recently divorced as well at this time.
Mm,
And so I was a single parent navigating this. And so candidly, there was really not an option. Like for me, it was just it was logical.
mm,
I almost like intellectualized it a little bit. It was, of course, emotionally devastating. And I think I'm still unpacking the emotional cascade from that decision, even, several years later. But there wasn't an option to do anything different, because for me to maintain
mm.
the home I wanted for my children in the right location, to maintain good food on our table, it wasn't just going to be, junk food that I didn't want to feed myself or my children. All of those things were something that as a parent, I really felt were non-negotiable. And so when I reached this inflection point, it was, I guess, almost, it was a grin and bear it, maybe a little bit in the immediate impact of it, but it just wasn't an option otherwise. And it was like, no, this is the path forward. Even if it's the hardest thing to do, this is the right thing. And I have to just trust and surrender that I'm moving in the right direction, even if it feels devastating and very challenging in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. And I think that a large majority of people would have taken
Yeah.
a different path. They would have quit their job. I mean, path of least resistance, whatever it looks like. And I'm not to say certainly what that looks like, but it seems like you really made an intentional effort to make this experience of values, not the word, but of, something positive and something you could work towards and take action
I think
around,
there were a couple
which
things
is
that
great.
led me to being able to do that in that moment that were really instrumental that I didn't even realize I had done at the time. Growing up, I was a competitive
Mhm.
swimmer that I kind of turned into being an endurance athlete as an adult. And so I had some conditioning in terms of just this concept of endurance to work through, which mentally is a certain experience. If you've done a really long run before and you're like, I am done, I don't want to finish this run, that moment your brain works between I'm done and I have a finish line in mind. That mind space, I think I'd had some preconditioning too. So that absolutely helped that moment. The other thing, there's a couple other things as well. I've maintained a journal, not a diary journal, but a daily planner since middle school. And so I have a handwritten journal and I write goals in it. I set intentions. I do a lot of self reflection both on like my own bias and what my goals are and like where I'm at and where I want to go. I think that habit contributed really meaningfully for me to be able to have confidence in the decision that I was setting. And that it wasn't just something arbitrary, but like
Mhm.
I've practiced this idea of setting an intention, setting a goal and following through on that intention. And so I think that the reflection in combination with the goal setting was also incredibly helpful for me to be able to execute on this effectively. And that was just a conditioning pattern that I had developed as an individual for, a decade or two by that point. The third thing I would say is integrity. That comes to doing the right thing, even if it is the hardest thing to do, and trusting, even if no one knows it or sees it, but trusting in yourself and your ability to make the decision that you believe is right, and then having confidence in that decision and just practicing that space of integrity. I studied philosophy as well in college. I was really interested in philosophy and theology, especially. And so I think that interest that I intrinsically had in the combination with this pattern and conditioning of reflection and this experience conditioning of endurance led me to have the perfect skill set to actually execute on this effectively. And I did so. And I think that those things have all contributed also to the success that I've been able to achieve since then as well.
Yeah, that's amazing, and definitely not something
Yeah.
that you would have predicted that a space you would fall into where you particularly wanted to,
I would have
right?
much rather run a
But,
marathon and
but
gotten a cool medal for it than doing what I did.
yeah, I'm sure of that. It's so interesting to me because patient end of life experience or the caretaker experience, you're either doing it or it's being done to you at one
Yeah.
point in your life, for most of us, right? And I feel like it's one of those things that no one really talks about until it's thrown on their
Because
plate.
it's scary. It's scary, and
And,
people don't want to talk about that. And
yeah,
it's understandable. Who would want to think about their own, end of life circumstances or somebody's end of life circumstances for someone they care about? And I think that, at least in our journey, what I didn't share earlier is that my son did pass away last summer after a 6.5 year challenge with brain cancer. He ultimately was a 4-time brain cancer and stroke survivor and was trach and G-tube dependent in that time, dependent on 24/7 private duty nursing for a period of time, hearing loss, vision impairments. We had a lot of medical complexity that made our journey even more intense than the typical cancer journey. And that was challenging. I lost my train of thought, so we might have to edit this little piece out if we need to get back on track.
yeah, all good, all good. So what I'd ask you was for those that are don't know much about what patient experience is, and I know they touched upon it, but when typically years ago when I thought about patient experiences, when you go to the doctor's office, are there magazines there? Are there nice couches there? Is there long wait time? But can you tell me a little bit more on what like and what ideal patient experience looks like or what
Yeah.
goes
So
on in your
patient
line of
experience as
work?
a discipline has evolved, especially over the last decade, especially. About a decade ago, there was a lot of conversation around like reputation management, like reviews of physicians, and how are
Mhm.
physicians creating an experience that would, trigger or inspire people to leave good reviews for this. So, patient experience for a long time has also been tied to reimbursements, performance of hospitals, patient safety. And the way they've measured those is through surveys in the hospital facility from the patients as well. So, inpatient versus outpatient, there's been kind of some trends that have been the groundwork for that space. Patient experience today is evolving to a significantly more dynamic discipline because technology is so pervasive and our ability to measure certain variables has improved in the last decade, especially. We have insight into that journey in ways maybe we didn't have previously because before we were relying on a single survey and someone's ability to recall that experience in detail enough to provide constructive criticism. And the more we also learn about trauma, and if someone had a particularly traumatic or bad experience, it might have even been a good experience and traumatic. But when your brain is experiencing trauma, its ability
Mhm.
to do called executive functioning gets impaired. And so it really has relying on a survey is not the most effective way, really, in a lot of cases, to measure patient experience because you can't necessarily correlate and capture all of the depth and detail from that journey if you have just a single survey as your point of insight. And so, with all these technologies evolving, patient experience is now moving into a discipline that is looking at how are we supporting the decision making and autonomy of patients and caregivers. And of course, AI is radically changing that landscape real time because we have so many patients and caregivers also now using tools like ChatGPT, for example, to symptom track, especially in the absence of a diagnosis. In some cases, where they're like, what is going on? Why do I have these things happening? And then
Yeah.
even just doing the frantic homework and using these tools to help them go and advocate for themselves when they do, in fact, get in front of a physician. But there's so many nuances beyond just the surveys that I think are really exciting for this space, especially beyond the like HCAP survey scores, which you would have in an inpatient environment. But you're looking at, are we supporting people's decision making appropriately? Are we empowering them to make decisions that are culturally competent and informed based on information and everything we know? This becomes really, really profound, impactful when you've exhausted the standard of care or the care you're receiving has to exist outside of what a standard of care might define. And the standard of care effectively is if you have a diagnosis, the industry agrees that there is a plan that can give you some level of confidence and outcome that you're looking for. Not all diagnoses have a very clear standard of care because some diagnoses are either rare disease, they're complex, they're dynamic. And there's lots of different things that impact that. That's all contingent on research and other things as well, including clinical trials and how much we're learning from those experiences too. So it's actually a very exciting space to be in at this moment because it intersects so many different components of healthcare delivery beyond the actual care plans and the clinical delivery. It looks at things like lighting and environmental factors. Temperature. Is the patient able to control that temperature in the room or the lighting in the room to match what their needs
Mhm.
are, either emotionally or biologically in some cases? There's a big push towards circadian rhythm alignment. So when you go into a hospital, for example, you're not disrupting your own circadian rhythm and impairing your ability to heal, which is a core
Mhm.
piece of, that recovery process. So it's just so exciting place to be because it intersects many diverse
Yeah.
disciplines. And so you've got lots of innovation happening within patient experience as well. And I think it's going to be the crux of the next
That's
generation
so
of healthcare. I think when we look at this.
that is so exciting. I mean, I think I thought about patient experience in a very black and white way, right? Like it's either good or it's bad. But like I never really thought about what are the components of make it good or make it bad, especially things like lighting and, whatnot. I remember one thing that I learned years ago was when you enter a doctor's office, it's not good to have couches there. This is something so simple about what you're doing, but it's not good to have couches there because then it forces people to sit on like next to
Yeah.
each other way too closely. And like when you're in that experience of, being in a hospital or you like need a little bit of your space and you not want to be on top of people. So
Yeah.
that was like my one doctor's office thing. But what I love about where you're going with it is there is a huge part of this that you are not emotionally sound at this point, whether you are the patient or you are the caregiver or anyone in between. And you're not just treating a human, you're treating a human that is go through could be one of the most traumatic experience of their life. So all of those data points that you collect and assess and recommend
Yeah.
is
That's
so
true for the
unique.
clinical teams too. So one of the biggest industry challenges right now that the industry is facing is clinical burnout. we have a massive staffing issue when it comes to nurses and clinicians. We just don't have enough people on the pipeline to support the need we have that we're anticipating in the next decade. And so this is a real industry problem. And so when you have burnout is a trauma. People are in a fight or flight state of mind. They're hypervigilant. Their ability to function this way is also impaired. And so one of the big takeaways I had from my experience as a caregiver was this realization that we've made a gross assumption in healthcare today that the industry it assumes that everybody engaging with the industry is doing so in a space of safe and sound emotional state. They're feeling rest and digest mode. And that's not true. Actually, more often than not, all of these stakeholders, the patient, the caregiver, the clinical teams, which include therapists, physicians, nurses, all of these people, even the administrators, are operating in a fear-based mindset. And they're doing so because they're afraid, they're stressed, they're hypervigilant. And our ability to engage meaningfully with the system in that state of mind is impaired. And I think we've done a lot of really fantastic work from an innovation standpoint. The infrastructure is in place. But I think if we actually shift our mindset ever so slightly to prioritize safety and creating spaces of safety and environments and situations of safety for everybody, we're going to see things work a lot more effectively than what we have in the past.
That's an endpoint because when you any sort of healthcare facility, it's always the first thing you hear is about patient safety, right? And I don't think I've ever thought about it in the way of environmental safety and health
Yeah.
safety and emotional safety
Because most
as
people are
part of
thinking
that.
from like an infectious disease standpoint. They're saying, how can we avoid
Exactly.
falls or hospital transmissions of infectious disease? Because those two things, the hospitals and healthcare systems are generally penalized for in some form or fashion. And so they're prioritizing those, understandably, because they're like, we can't afford to have these things happen on our watch. But we're missing this really critical moment, and that's the experience of healthcare as a human being. And I think if we shift our mentality to recognizing that we're all human beings with nervous systems that are always oscillating between feeling safe and then hypervigilant, we're going to actually see so much of what we've built work so much better if we actually just focus on safety emotionally as a starting point.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to put a little bit on, you have mentioned a lot of these traumatic periods of your life, long spent more than most people get in their lifetime, that's for sure. So as part of that though, you've done some really amazing things, and I know that you've got your career pivots and things like that, but you've also built some of your own businesses and programs along the way. So tell me about like how do you get the inspiration, the energy, and tell me a little bit more about
Everything
it.
I've built candidly has just come from that lived experience and being able to reflect on that journey and say, what did I need that I didn't have? And how can I help create that for someone else who might experience the same thing? That's it. I mean, I can't say that it was like some spark of inspiration and like divine intervention, but it was just these gritties that felt particularly painful or challenging. And I remember reflecting on them. For example, August Artist was born literally at 3 o'clock in the morning in a hospital. We were on the oncology floor. I was drawing a picture on my son's hospital room window. I was drawing Wally out of his room. And I felt self. I was like, oh, I love artwork. I love doing this for me. This is just like my indulgence. And so in the moment, it was very therapeutic. And then I learned that the crayons I was using to draw with were actually funded by the nurses themselves. They were paying out of pocket to make these crayons available to the patient families. And it wasn't that the hospital didn't want to prioritize this. They valued it, but it just wasn't like top list priorities for them. And when you have something more formalized as the program, there's a lot more nuances that come with it. Infectious disease gets involved. So it becomes a little bit more challenging to implement. But that didn't sit right with me. And it occurred to me was how valuable that one simple experience was that I could look forward to when we had hospitalizations. I could say, ooh, what picture are we going to draw this hospital stay? And instead reframe that experience into something we could look forward to and find little glimmers of those rather than just dread and despair through that journey. And when I learned that the nurses were paying for these crayons out of pocket, I was like, why don't we just create a fund to make these crayons available for every family? Like for starters, that should be a no-brainer. And this was just before COVID. And so initially I was, this thought exercise evolved into, oh, well, let's bring in universities or art communities. Maybe they can donate their own time and come into the hospital and do artwork for the patient families. And there's a lot of challenges when it comes to bringing people into a clinical environment. There's a lot of screenings. And then, of course, COVID happened and a lot of things have changed since COVID came and the COVID occurred that impact, who's able to access a hospital environment, for example. So that ideation, that thought exercise had to pivot. And what occurred to me in that thought exercise as I continued down that journey was it's not even necessarily the access to the artwork that make this valuable. This artwork represents for us it's almost a medal from running a marathon, right? It's a validation that what you have experienced in these rooms is real, and you start to together. Oh my gosh! So the real thing here is, what if we commemorate the artwork so that because the patient families can't bring this home with them, the artwork's there, but it goes away as soon as they're discharged. So our program pivoted and we turned into this kind of 3-pillar approach with the crayon donations. And then we have an actual program that we offer to the hospitals we partner with where they can scan a QR code. Actually have one of these right here. They have a little badge tag that they can keep on their nurse. It says turning hospital stays into masterpiece days. And they can scan the QR code and it takes that artwork. You can take a photo, upload it through the form, and then we take the background and we remove the background, clean up the artwork into a piece of clip art that the family could then use to put on a t-shirt and run a fundraiser if they want to combat the financial toxicity of a diagnosis that they might have. They can put it on and collect the artwork and put them on blankets or socks or other things that they might want to do to express what that was that they went through and use it as a badge to express, not just the validation, but that they accomplished something that was really hard. And I have another vision that maybe, the clinical teams might even want to commemorate the artwork too. So this is a program that we don't isolate just to the patients and the patient families, but we say this is available to the clinical teams as well. So many of these nurses grow, very attached to some of the patients they care for. And when you've got PHI or this patient health information that can limit how you maintain and contact with some of these patients, if you can preserve the artwork, for example, that doesn't have PHI attached to it, it might be a way to help honor and commemorate that journey for the clinical teams as well. And so our program's literally built from just a real world experience and the lived experience of what that journey was like. And so much of my work since then has been inspired in a very similar capacity. It was just something hard happened that felt hard for me. I would imagine that was probably hard for someone else. How can we problem solve in this space to make this easier? How did I problem solve in this space to make it easier for me? And is there a way to scale this into something that can actually help impact the industry as a whole?
Yeah. I'm going to be including all of the information on August Artists and where you can donate, look into it. But absolutely, please share. We will look to follow you and engage. It's such a good idea. Such an
Yeah.
incredible idea and so
Yeah.
simple, but it's so simple. That's like the things I feel like people keep looking for the hard stuff to do, but it's really the simple stuff that we oftentimes overlook, like you just picking up a crayon and having a really positive experience for a moment with your son in an impossible moment
Yeah.
to have a positive experience, right?
And that's what I've tried,
that's
I think,
incredible.
to reflect even in my career as someone who works in the strategic communications world, right? Is there some greater truth that exists when it comes to innovation and innovation strategy that is in motion with something like this? And so one of the things I've been massaging and working on that I've currently coined the Monarch model. I don't know if that's like its its ultimate name, but it's this idea that analog opportunities for innovation are just as powerful as the most technology forward ones. And if it's on lived experience as your catalyst point for whatever those ideas are, you really can't go wrong. And we need to be putting lived experiences more at the center of our strategy instead of relying on that as an afterthought and trying to retrofit it into what we assume or think that experience might be like. There are a lot of people with experiences that are sharing these things today. It's not hard to find lived experience insights. It sounds challenging because it's also human and it's messy, but it's our most underutilized resource we have today in healthcare to actually make things substantially better for everybody, not just patients and caregivers, but for clinical teams and everyone involved.
Yeah, that's truly the patient at the center, the patient experience at the center. And in some capacity, someone that we know has been through it, and it is
Mhm.
easy to source that, right? But we're sometimes I feel like businesses are like almost over engineering
Yeah.
these things, right? Like just simply, like, how did you feel in that moment? Like, what was it like for you getting that phone call, walking into that room, receiving that piece of
Yeah.
paper, right? Like all of those
'Cause I think,
emotions that,
emotional states are so much harder to measure. And I think that detracts some folks from innovating in that world. And so I think just as a society, we've overvalued better, faster, cheaper, operationalized things and measurements like that in favor of how did that help a human make a decision that served their highest good? And if we actually just come back to
Mhm.
that and look at the human experience as a measure of our success, and not just did it make them feel good for some reason, but did it allow them to achieve something that was their highest expression? Almost, a reimagining of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying, did we create a system that empowered this individual who was a part of that environment be able to achieve their highest expression? Sounds very metaphysical, very like esoteric, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. And these things have been studied for thousands of years. It's not incredibly foreign. It's just not something we prioritize because it's so much harder, I think, in some ways to measure an ROI on those experiences than just saying, we made something better, we made something faster, we made something cheaper.
right, right. That's interesting. So now what are you doing with your now that I
Yeah,
know
let's create
you had
another one.
one
So, but
on
back to lived experience, right? So I've been reflecting on this monarch model, and the butterfly metaphor has been like especially powerful for me in my own caregiver journey. I've had my own health challenges as well. I've had alopecia universalis, and I'm healing from topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, which is a pretty brutal condition that left me bedridden actually for a period of time, and especially during August kind of final months, which was really challenging and heartbreaking. But in that lived experience, the monarch was born for all of that reflection. And so I've founded a firm, Monarch Futures, where we're focused on bringing that model to businesses and saying, how can we help them rethink their product and service strategy so that it put lived experience at the center? And it continues to iterate from that point. It's not tokenized. It's not a one time, we checked with a patient to see if they liked this, and then we continued on our way, but actually brought patients and caregivers into that iterative experience and into that product development journey so that they're continually brought in for perspective, so that what's developed ultimately does serve that core need and better health outcomes at the end of the day. And so I'm really focused on expanding that, massaging it, seeing if it becomes something more concrete. I think that there is something there. And so I've been including that in my keynotes. It seems to resonate with folks when I bring it up. And so that's what I'm currently exploring. I'm trying to see if that works. And then bringing in a lot of the strategic communications coaching as well to complement that, the storytelling for executives so that they also can think about their own experience and bring their whole self to their personal platform. And so coming from both directions, really, and looking at storytelling and the role that that has, ultimate health outcomes in healthcare. And that's what Monarch Futures is focused on trying to solve.
And what sort of clients is it? Is systems, doctors' offices?
Yeah,
Who
targeting,
are you targeting?
I've spent a lot of my career in healthcare innovation and digital health. So that's a sweet spot. I have a
Mhm.
background in interoperability and
Okay.
have worked in some of those communities as well in data exchange. And so it's a passion of mine, including, access to data and access to usable data, because that's going to be how we help substantiate these models going forward as measurements of our performance. But I don't think it's exclusive to them. I think it is something that's valuable for health systems. I think it's valuable for even, advocacy organizations, other nonprofits. Really, I think anybody
Mhm.
who lives and operates within the healthcare industry, I think could be a candidate for some of this work.
Yeah. Well, you are made for this work and absolutely made for this work, and you're so inspiring. And what I love about your story that I think a lot of people can provide a peace of mind about is that whatever path you're on now, what you're doing now, it prepares you for the future, but not always in
Absolutely.
the way that you thought.
I never would have thought I'd be here. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I always thought of that as something other. But funny enough, I
Yeah.
found myself now the founder of several companies and several initiatives, and that feels right. And so I suppose I am an entrepreneur at this point, if I need to
Mhm.
accept that or not.
So I'm going to pause here for 1 second. Do you want to me to ask you any specific questions or
Not anything in particular, I don't think. I think you asked some really great ones, and so I think I've kinda covered the gamut. So anywhere.
Okay, I just
Yeah,
wanna make sure you
thank
have
you.
enough clips that you can use
Yeah,
for your
maybe you ask me about the monarch model, and I can expand on that a little bit. That might be a good one.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about what the
So I
model
mentioned
is.
it, taking lived experience and putting it at the center. And I've talked about this in several of the keynotes that I've done. But effectively, what it is a model for innovation and catalyzing innovation for a company that wants to develop a service or product that serves the healthcare industry overall. And historically, we've looked at an innovation model like the three-leg stool. If you've heard of that, it's got people, process, technology. And if you don't have something addressing one of those components, the stool effectively falls over. That's the model and visual that's been presented. I don't think that that's exactly right. And so, what I've done with the Monarch model is it's an evolution of that. It's iterative. And it says we have people as a third point in the three-leg stool model, but it's not essentially the people per se, because that could be talent, that could be the patient, which are two very different forces at play in this environment. So, instead, it's taking that human lived experience and moving it to the center, which impacts all things. But instead, the endpoints on the outside, instead of a three-leg stool, actually becomes gears. And so on the three gears surrounding lived experience at the center is access, or kind of a concept of equity. Like, how easy is it? And is it low friction to be able to access what it is you need in this environment? There's process, which is your systems, the care plans, for example. It's the workflows, it's the data interoperability workflows. It's all the things that move in the environment. That's on one of the sides. And we need that to work as well. And then the other piece is technology. And, technology certainly can include a lot of different things, but we need to get tech right. Tech can also be AI and other solutions like that as well. So, you have technology, systems, and access or equity at the ends, and then lived experiences in the center. Center is a gear. And so all three move as a result of that central gear being our source of power. And if we don't center to lived experience, nothing works, either in its own or together as a result. And so that's the heart and soul of the model conceptually that I'm exploring and trying to solidify and see that holds up in the real world. And that's, we're out with the Monarch model today.
I love it. I mean, it's absolutely grounding, and I think just beyond
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
my brain's all over right now. This has inspired me. It's really, in the other marketing spaces, we call it ICP, right? Like who your ideal customer profile, but really getting to the core, to the center of what that means from, their empathy, their position, all
Be the
things, but
customer either
in
exclusively. All right. It's like the human
right.
experience
Yeah.
of the system, of the technology, of the access. And if you don't
Mhm.
have those things on the outside, it doesn't work. But it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be limited to your
Yeah.
customer in the center of that.
Right, right. And it's almost the outsides, or the three parts of the stool, are the things. They're
Those
the
are
things,
disciplines.
right? But in the middle, yeah, so interesting. You have me
Are
thinking.
your gears
You have
turning?
me thinking for sure. No, I
Yeah.
know yours are turning. So this is how you're now, the
That's
philosophy of
exactly
you
right.
operating your new business. So incredible. So incredible. I think you really have something absolutely special. And I've told that to you that before, but I think that it kind of goes back to, like, when you go to choose someone to be part of your patient experience, caregiver experience team, you want someone that really knows that entirely, can embody that, and operates how they run their.
It's going to become so much more valuable and important for us to prioritize, especially as AI continues
Mm.
to expand what we do to make decisions in our day to day life. Because these tools right now we're co creating with, and they're very prompt driven, broadly speaking, when it comes to generative AI solutions. But we're moving to a space where we're going to have things like digital twins. We're going to have autonomous agents making decisions as a result of direction we give them, but they're making decisions on our behalf. decision making and preserving human
Mhm.
based decision making is going to become so important going forward. We have to make sure that everything we do is going to serve human well being as much as possible going forward. Because if we lose sight of that, one, nothing will work on the outside. The processes won't work, the technology not going to land, the systems aren't going to work the way that they should. And we're going to miss what's ultimately the goal here, and that's creating better quality of lives for people so they can achieve their highest good, their highest potential, regardless of what life throws at them, regardless of those
Mhm.
circumstances. And that's really what we need to be doing and need to be focused on as industry and enterprise today.
Yeah, yeah. So interesting. And, just thinking about what you just said, we actually have so much in common with our businesses in terms of, the program that I made, the Real Work Ready program. I made a conscious decision at the beginning of it. I could have made it fully online, fully tech, right? But I knew the part was missing. What people needed most was to have an experience that really engaged them, that was memorable. They took something away from. And I think that will be the differentiator in all businesses as we move forward is what is the human
Absolutely.
element that you incorporate
And our humanity
in
can't be a
this?
default variable that we think is going to be there. That won't anymore with the technology that we're anticipating in the near future.
Right, right. Well, Erica, you have been absolutely fantastic. And I want to close you out the same that I close out everyone on the call where I ask you, I have all these papers in front of me. Okay, Erica. So I want to close you out by asking you the question that I ask all of my guests when they come onto this show is that early in your career, nobody told me this, but once I figured it out, it changed absolutely everything for
Early
me.
in my career, I would say like a philosophy. The thing that really stood out for me is like do the work before life happens. Have a sense of urgency and knowing who you are and where you're going. You don't have to commit to any outcome, but know who you are, know how you're wired. Know how life shaped you as a kid. Know your coping mechanisms because when life
Mhm.
happens, you're not going to have an opportunity to do the work in that moment. But all the work you've done to that point is going to get put to work. So you have to be able to have done that work before life happens to really be able to navigate it successfully.
Really, really amazing. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you so much. Where can
Yeah.
folks follow up with you? And
Probably the best place is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time these days. Like it's now the default social network for everything professional. So you're welcome to find me there. I'm Erica Olenski on LinkedIn. I think there's only one of me. I'm also on Instagram. That's more of like a personal channel, but you can follow me there because I do a lot of advocacy storytelling through that channel. That's the Great Chalupa, THEGR8 Chalupa. There's a story behind that, but I'll save that for another time. And you can find, more information about August Artists at artists.org, as well as Monarch Futures at futures.com. And I'd love for everyone to kind of follow along and see what comes from the Monarch model and the journey there.
amazing. Thank you so, so much, Erica. Until next time, we definitely will talk again. And I'm so excited to see how your business grows. I am absolutely rooting for you.
Thanks so much, Laura. Appreciate it.